Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is our good friend, Lil Copan. Lil serves as Senior Acquisitions Editor for Trade Books at Broadleaf Books, which used to be part of Fortress Press. Well, it's still part of Fortress Press. It used to be called Fortress Press. She previously worked in acquisitions for several religious publishing houses, including Erdman's, Abingdon, Ave Maria, and Paraclete, among others. Among her areas of expertise are author and platform cultivation, substantive editing, and cross-platform content development. Lil has worked with an impressive array of best-selling authors, including Madeline L'Engle, Scott McKnight, Debbie Blue, Amy Frykholm, Thomas Lynch, and Lauren Winner. She acquired Frederick Buechner's Faces of Jesus for Paraclete in 2004 and was credited by Jana Reese in a 2011 Publishers Weekly interview for having brilliantly suggested the concept of her book, Flunking Sainthood. So Lil, it's so good to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be with you and have this conversation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so maybe you can start by telling us how the pandemic has affected you and how you feel it's affecting society more generally.
Yeah, well, I am sort of looking at this universal crisis and observing, my own, anguish, my community's anguish, and, also realizing that I have many resources, both spiritual and, physical, and, that others don't have, and really trying to pay attention to that. I'm realizing that everybody has their own sort of micro crisis. Everybody's facing, either health or financial devastation, but they're also, facing loneliness, and everybody has their own issues that are coming to the fore that are really, we're really trying to wrestle down and wrestle through, and all of the ways that we approach those things that are both within ourselves, within our communities, and sort of larger universal issues. So I'm observing so many things that are changing with me and the community, everything from, how I'm getting groceries to, how I'm interacting with neighbors, and how I'm now attending, church, and the ability to attend churches I have not had the opportunity to because of travel. So I'm finding some unique gifts in this time. And one of a church that I've been virtually attending is in Brooklyn. So I have been really sort of honored to see people who are really fighting front lines, from chaplains to those who are working in food services and helping there. So sort of appreciating the opportunity to pray with communities who are really in the middle of big work.
Well, I'm doing the same thing. I'm actually virtually attending a church up in Boston. You used to live up there, and I used to spend more time up there. And Old South Church is, a place where my wife and I used to go some of the time when we were there. Mm-hmm. And so we've been attending that every Sunday, as well as our church in New Jersey. So kind of your former stomping grounds.
It certainly is. Yeah, I miss the city. I miss the ocean, for sure. But yeah, and I'm now New Mexico based, so that's a very different terrain.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're kind of in the middle of this right now. Do you have any thoughts on how we'll look back on this whole experience a year or 2 years from now? Or are you going to encourage someone to write a book about that?
Oh, believe me, publishing, we're certainly looking for opportunities and ways. I think we're thinking about sort of the larger ways that people think about crises, and maybe not necessarily pandemic, but that have real application to pandemic times or times of national and community crisis. So I think we're thinking a lot about the publishing program in that vein and what works. I think there's a lot of swirl and online conversation and personal conversation around this wanting to really hold high in memory these times and these issues rather than, the V curve, if the economy comes back and some of our communities are recovering, to forget what these times say to us and sort of beg us to pay attention to that we would not normally do. So I'm wanting, I don't know what the conversation will look like. My hope is that the conversation will continue to keep these conversations in mind in the future.
So one of the things we've been talking about during this entire interview series is kind of how God has supported us through challenging times in our own past and how we've been able to draw on that now. Yeah. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I have, thoughts of, both thinking about readers and the books that we have put out with Broadleaf. There are several mindfulness books that have come out very recently. Irene Kragel and Steve Wiens that I think are sort of helpful in this space. Drawing on, I've always had an interest in both sort of spiritual practices, contemplative practices, but also justice issues, and really wanting to think about, I've been wanting to think about ways to support struggling communities as well as pray for them, and especially in New Mexico now with Navajo, the Dene people, really struggling profoundly, wanting to sort of hold that community, especially in prayer and care. Some of the things I think in this space that have been really helpful for me have been returning to the poets who always seem to know how to reflect on these specific kinds of times and anguishes through sort of normal time, ordinary time. And so returning to them sort of allows, I think, that the memory, the recollection, without with that instilled hope too that I'm finding in, some of the poets. I mean, returning some of the older poets, Emily Dickinson sort of holds so much. And Padre Gotwama, who is now doing the On Being, the Poetry Unbound series, and reading those poems. I think that engagement is really important. So I have a couple things to read. I've also been thinking about how stories and myth sort of hold places, these sort of larger stories that we have told through years, through centuries, through generations, and how they continue to offer us something in these times and better times to hold on to feed the well. I know that a lot of people have been writing in the space of, about, sort of the writers that have sort of emerged from the plague and, those who have written about the spiritual life. And I think the, Julian of Norwich, I think, has been an informing spiritual presence.
She's getting a lot of play these days.
She is. So I've gone back to just wanting to read how, this person who can sort of speak to really spiritual devastation and personal loss, which she did, as well as this kind of buoyant hope, which together form this curious complexity and beauty. But I've gone back to, actually, you spoke of Amy Frickholm and, her Julian of Norwich spiritual biography, I think, gets at some of that real beauty. So I've sort of come to that. And then, just holding on to some of those, maybe some of the quotes. So, I have a little collection of these quotes from Julian of Norwich, and that somebody can, come from a time of plague and write on sort of beauty or delight or love, is somebody I want to spend time with. I'll read you a couple if that's okay.
Sure, yeah, please do.
On delight, two duties belong to the soul. The first is to wonder and to be astonished. The other is to let go and let be, ever taking delight in God. I think that's really something I have been able to hold on to in this time. On our preciousness, by the gracious light of God, we understand three things. First, we are nobly and excellently made. Second, we are precious and of great value. And third, we have been given creation because we are loved. We've had in-house, we've had at our publishing house, we've had a lot of conversation about nature also being, just even cracks in the sidewalk where there's green opening up in some of our personal spaces and yards, or cityscapes, where there is green, where there is something that is growing, is a wonderment, and I think a real a gift of creation for soul desperate times. I think those are some of the things that have been really feeding the well for me, giving hope. Yeah.
There are quite a few folks that have mentioned poetry and nature as being particularly helpful right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure I think, we're in the sort of universal crises and the personal crises. I think we're finding this common conversation around the book of nature, and the poets, for sure. They've been steady through the centuries. It doesn't sort of make sense that they wouldn't sort of hold in this time. Yeah. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So are there any other particular books or resources that you'd like to share with us?
I am, especially now, sort of thinking about some of the First Nations peoples and, indigenous peoples, and Joy Harjo's new role as poet laureate. I'm reading her Map to the Next World, and really interested in some of the poems. And more locally is, if I can find her book, I don't know if sorry, I'm making a reach for Lucy Tapahanso. She is a local New Mexican poet, and I think some of the work that she has done in writing specifically from her community and speaking to sacred land and space and sky and desert as a man. I think there is something that is really profound that I'm so grateful that one community shares with another. I've also been reading, just in terms of story and myth, I've been returning to Eduardo Galeano's book, which is Voices of Time, that each of them is this like little nugget that is that offers a lot for reflection. So even if you, and especially I've heard also, and maybe, that the sort of focused attention, it's curious that maybe some people have more time for reflection, having to sort of limit the scope of their travel. And others are finding that even within that their attention span is short for all of the news and grieving and processing. So I've really, they're really short little stories that reveal truths, and you can hold on to them for a long time. So I'll just read a little one, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Angelo, it's called The Peasant. Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli, born and raised on a tiny plot of land, shed no tears of nostalgia when he recalled his childhood there. Men, he said, have three ways of ruining their lives: women, gambling, and farming. Of the three, my father chose the most boring. But every day he climbed the Tower of Wind, the Vatican's highest spire, and settled down to look. Spyglass in hand, he'd quickly scan the streets, then search for the 7 hills on the outskirts of Rome, where the land was still land. He'd spend hours contemplating the distant greenery until duty obliged him to end his communion. Then Angelo would put on his white cassock, and with his pen in his pocket and his cross on his chest, the only thing he owned in the world, he'd return to the throne where once again he'd become Pope John the 23rd. So
cool.
Those kinds of stories just give you both something of wisdom, something of time, something of timelessness that I have found, feed the well. So
that's very cool. That's very cool. Well, is there anything else before we wrap up that you'd like to share with us?
I would just love to, encourage people who are, interested in books on mindfulness, or some of the books on grieving in this time, that Broadleaf Books has some good resources. So it's broadleafbooks.com. And also coming in the future, early fall, I have a novel that'll be coming out with One Bird Books. And for those who are missing baseball season, and those who are drawn to birding because there's very little to do in the constricted spaces, but the birds are showing up to give some cheer and song. It's a book of birding and baseball. So
interesting. Yes, that sounds great, Lil. We'll be looking forward to that. Please send a link our way when it's available.
I will do. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And
thanks. Thanks very much for joining us, Lil. It's great to talk with you again, and always wonderful to spend time together. So thank you for taking some time to speak with us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and wonderful to spend time with you, and so glad for all that you are doing to support communities in this time and give hope and words and books and authors, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Lil. As you know, it's my pleasure. I love doing this.
Yeah.
All right. Bye for now.
Bye for now. Thank you.